I struggled reading this and uploading it. Let me say this, not every man will move like you think he should. Everyone is not built the same. Everyone doesn't think like you think they should. Everyone's decisions won't align with yours. Now, here is the story. I've been married to my wife for 18 years. We're both in our late 40s now, and we have 4 kids together. Our youngest is in 8th grade, and our oldest graduated high school last spring and left for college in August. We've been attending the same church for the past 12 years, ever since we moved to this town for my job transfer. I work as a shift supervisor at a distribution warehouse, and my wife works part-time as a receptionist at a dental clinic 3 days a week. Our lives revolved around church activities more than I think either of us realized. Sunday services, Wednesday night Bible study, volunteer work, youth group activities for the kids, potlucks, mission trips, you name it. If the church doors were open, we were probably there. My wife became particularly close with several women in the congregation over the years. She joined a women's Bible study group that met every Thursday morning, and she genuinely seemed happier and more fulfilled having that community. I was happy she found her people, because making friends as an adult is hard, and she had struggled with that when we first moved here. About 3 years ago, a new family started attending our church. The husband worked as an assistant manager at a grocery store, and his wife was a substitute teacher in the school district. They had 3 kids, all around the same ages as our younger children. Everyone welcomed them warmly, as our church always did with newcomers. My wife immediately clicked with the wife, and they became fast friends within just a few weeks. Soon, they were texting constantly, meeting for coffee, and their kids were having play dates at each other's houses. I was genuinely happy about it because my wife had been complaining about feeling isolated since our oldest started getting more independent. The husband seemed like a decent guy too. He joined the men's fellowship group that I was part of, and we would all grab breakfast together on Saturday mornings once a month. He was quiet, kind of kept to himself, but seemed like an okay guy. Nothing about him raised any red flags for me at the time. Everything seemed normal and healthy for about 2 years. Then around March of last year, I started noticing small changes in my wife's behavior. She was suddenly very particular about her appearance in ways she hadn't been in years. New clothes, different hairstyle, spending more time getting ready even when we were just going to church or running errands. She started going to the gym, which was great, but she'd never shown any interest in fitness before, despite me suggesting it several times over the years. Her phone became an extension of her hand, felt like that thing was surgically implanted. She didn't go anywhere without it. She'd smile at texts and quickly minimize the screen if I walked into the room. When I asked who she was talking to, it was always her best friend or someone from church. The Thursday morning Bible study started running longer and longer. What used to be a 2-hour commitment turned into her being gone for 4 or 5 hours. She said they'd started going out to lunch afterward, or sometimes just sitting in the parking lot talking. I thought it was odd, but I didn't want to be controlling or suspicious without cause. She started volunteering for everything at church, especially things that involved working alongside the other man. Church cleanup days, organizing the food pantry, helping with vacation Bible school planning committees. There was always a reason she needed to be there, and he always seemed to be there too. I noticed them talking after services, standing just a little too close, laughing a little too enthusiastically at things that were not that funny. But again, I convinced myself I was being paranoid. We have been married for almost 2 decades. We had 4 kids. We were pillars of our church community. Surely she wouldn't risk all of that. The real wake-up call came in July, during our annual church camping trip. Every year, a bunch of families from the congregation rent spots at a campground about an hour away and spend a long weekend together. It's always been a highlight for our family, and the kids look forward to it all year. This time felt different from the moment we arrived. My wife volunteered to help the other man's wife with meal planning and cooking for the group. which meant she spent most of the weekend at their campsite instead of ours. I was left managing our 4 kids by myself while she was supposedly helping prepare food and organize activities. But when I'd walk over to check on things or drop off kids, she and him were always off to the side having intense, private conversations. His wife didn't seem to notice, or maybe she was in denial like I was trying to be. On the second night of the trip, I woke up around 2 in the morning and realized my wife wasn't in our tent. I went looking for her, telling myself she probably just went to the bathroom or couldn't sleep. I found her sitting by the dying campfire with him, both of them in camping chairs pulled close together, speaking in low voices. When I approached, they jumped apart like they'd been shocked. She claimed they were just talking about church stuff, planning the upcoming fall festival. I didn't buy it, but I also didn't want to cause a scene in front of everyone at the campground at 2 in the morning. We had a tense conversation back in our tent, where she accused me of being jealous and controlling. She said I was imagining things and that I was embarrassing her by acting suspicious of innocent friendships. She cried and said she couldn't believe I'd accuse her of something so horrible after all these years together. I felt like the bad guy, so I apologized and tried to let it go, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. After we got home from the camping trip, things got worse. She started leaving the house at odd times, claiming she needed to run errands or had forgotten something at the store. She'd be gone for 2 or 3 hours for what should have been a quick trip. Our intimate life, which had admittedly slowed down over the years, completely dried up. She always had an excuse: too tired, not feeling well, or stressed. I tried to initiate conversations about what was going on with us, but she'd either change the subject or start an argument about something completely unrelated. The final straw came in early September on a Wednesday. My truck had been making a weird noise for a few days, so I dropped it off at the mechanic that morning before work. One of my coworkers gave me a ride to work, and the plan was for my wife to pick me up after her shift at the dental clinic ended at 5. Around 10:30 that morning, the mechanic called and said the problem was just a loose belt and they already fixed it. He said I could pick it up anytime, and the bill was only $60. My coworker offered to take me to get my truck during our lunch break, so at 11:45 we left the warehouse. I picked up my truck, paid the mechanic, and thanked my coworker for the ride to get it. I figured I'd grab lunch at home before heading back to work for my afternoon shift. As I was driving down our street around noon, I saw my wife's car parked in our driveway. That immediately struck me as strange because she was supposed to be at work until 5. Something felt wrong, and I couldn't explain why, but my gut told me not to pull into the driveway. I drove past our house and parked my truck 3 houses down on the street. I sat there for a moment, trying to figure out what I was doing. Maybe she'd come home sick. Maybe she'd forgotten something. Maybe there was a perfectly reasonable explanation. But after months of suspicious behavior, I couldn't ignore this. I got out of my truck and walked back toward our house. When I got to our driveway, I noticed that our garage door was closed. I walked to the side door by the garage and walked in. Our garage connects to the house through a small laundry room, and as soon as I stepped inside the garage, I could hear music playing. It was coming from inside the house, from what sounded like the living room. I stood there in the garage, frozen, listening. Then I heard voices over the music, my wife's voice and his voice. My heart started pounding so hard I thought it might explode out of my chest. I quietly opened the door that leads from the garage into our laundry room and stepped inside. The music was louder now, coming from the living room just beyond the short hallway. I heard my wife laugh at something he said. I pulled out my phone and started recording audio. I pressed myself against the wall in the laundry room, barely breathing, listening to them. My wife said something about how she called the clinic and told them she was sick and couldn't come in today. He laughed and said he told his manager he had a family emergency and needed the day off. She said something about having at least 3 hours before the kids got home from school. He said something about how they needed to be more careful, that people were starting to notice how much time they spent together. She told him she didn't care anymore, that she was tired of sneaking around. What I heard over the next 20 minutes confirmed every suspicion I had for months. They were not just emotionally involved. This was a full-blown physical affair. They talked about how hard it was to find time alone, about previous times they met up, about feelings I won't repeat here. I heard them kissing, heard the couch creaking, heard my wife making sounds I hadn't heard her make in years. I stood there in my own laundry room, hidden in my own house, listening to my wife betray me and our marriage in the most horrific way possible. At some point, I heard them get up and start moving around. She said something about how he should probably leave soon, just to be safe. He agreed and said he parked down the street anyway, so the neighbors wouldn't see his car. I heard footsteps heading toward the front of the house. I heard the front door open and close. Then there was silence, except for the music still playing in the living room. I stood in that laundry room for another 10 minutes, trying to process this. My whole body was shaking, and I felt like I might throw up. Eventually, I heard my wife moving around in the kitchen. I quietly slipped back into the garage and stood there, trying to figure out what to do. Part of me wanted to go in there and confront her right then and there. Part of me wanted to get back in my truck and drive away and never come back. Instead, I waited another 5 minutes. Then I walked into the house through the laundry room like I just arrived. My wife was in the kitchen making herself tea, and she jumped when she saw me. She asked what I was doing home, and I could see the panic in her eyes. I told her the mechanic had called early and said my truck was ready, so I'd come home to grab lunch before heading back to work. She said she called in sick because she woke up with a terrible migraine and needed to rest. I honestly couldn't believe how easy it was for her to lie like that. I said I wasn't feeling well either, but I was going to head back to work. Then I left and sat in my truck in a parking lot, crying harder than I'd cried since my father died. Everything I thought I knew about my life, my marriage, my family felt like a lie. I didn't confront her that evening when I got home from work. I needed time to think, to figure out what to do with this information. I had 4 kids to think about. Our entire lives were intertwined with this church community, and I knew that exposing this would blow up everything. For 2 weeks, I walked around in a fog, pretending everything was normal while dying inside. I watched her text him right in front of me, watched her light up when I thought she got a text from him, watched her lie about where she was going and who she was with. Every Sunday we sat in church together as a family, and I would see him sitting with his wife and kids a few rows ahead of us. His wife looked happy, oblivious, trusting. Their kids seemed well-adjusted and content. I kept thinking about how many lives were going to be destroyed when this came out, because it would come out. These things always do. The question was whether I was going to control the narrative or let it explode on its own terms. I struggled with what the right thing to do was. Part of me wanted to confront them both privately and demand it end immediately. Part of me wanted to go straight to his wife and tell her what her husband was doing. Part of me wanted to pack up my kids and leave without explaining anything to anyone. But there was another part of me that kept thinking about our church community and how this wasn't just about my marriage anymore. These were 2 people who stood up in front of our congregation regularly, who volunteered with youth groups, who prayed with other families, who presented themselves as faithful servants, and they were living a lie that could potentially damage a lot of people beyond just their spouses. I also thought about the fact that our pastor had counseled us before marriage, had baptized all 4 of our children, had been there for our family during hard times. He deserved to know that 2 members of his congregation were not who they appeared to be. After 3 weeks of internal torment, I made an appointment to speak with our pastor privately. This was late September, about 3 weeks after I caught them. I brought the audio recording with me. along with a timeline of all the suspicious behavior and circumstances I documented. I told him everything, from the beginning of my suspicions to standing in my laundry room listening to them in my own house. He listened without interrupting, his face growing more grave as I spoke. When I finished, he was quiet for a long time. Finally, he said that this was an incredibly serious situation that required careful handling. He asked if I had confronted my wife yet, and I told him I hadn't. He asked if I planned to, and I said I didn't know what I planned to do about anything. He told me he needed to pray on this and seek guidance, but that he felt he had a responsibility to address it with both of them. We agreed that he would call meetings with each of them separately first. 2 days later, our pastor called my wife and asked her to come to the church for a meeting about volunteer coordination. She agreed without hesitation, thinking it was routine. When she arrived and saw me sitting there with the pastor, she seemed genuinely surprised. She knew immediately why we were there. The pastor explained that he has been made aware of serious allegations regarding her relationship with the other man. He asked her to be honest about the nature of that relationship. She tried to deny it at first, said we were just friends, that people were reading too much into things. Then the pastor said he'd heard evidence that suggested otherwise, and I pulled out my phone. I didn't play the recording. Just having it was enough. She broke down, sobbing and apologizing and saying she didn't know how it had happened. She said it had started as an emotional connection because she felt lonely in our marriage, that she felt taken for granted and invisible. She said it had become physical in May, about 4 months earlier, that she knew it was wrong, that she'd been trying to find a way to end it. The pastor asked if she was willing to end the affair immediately and commit to rebuilding our marriage through counseling. She said yes, that she wanted to save our family, that she'd made a terrible mistake. Then the pastor said he would need to have the same conversation with the other man and that his wife would need to be informed as well. My wife panicked at that, begged him not to tell them, said it would destroy their family. The pastor explained that this wasn't just about our 2 marriages anymore. This was about the integrity of the church community. He scheduled a meeting with the other man for the next evening. That meeting apparently went very differently. According to our pastor, when confronted, the other man denied everything at first. He said my wife had misread their friendship, that any feelings were one-sided on her part, that nothing physical had ever happened between them. He actually tried to make my wife look like she'd been pursuing him inappropriately. The pastor told him about the evidence I had, and his story changed immediately. Suddenly, he admitted to feelings but claimed they'd only kissed once and immediately regretted it. The pastor called him out on the lie and told him that his wife deserved to know the truth. That's when he started crying and begging the pastor not to say anything. He said it would destroy his marriage and his kids would hate him. The pastor told him he had 48 hours to tell his wife himself before the pastor would do it for him. I wasn't present for that meeting, but our pastor filled me in afterward. What happened next was like watching dominoes fall. The other man told his wife 2 days later on a Saturday evening. She showed up at our house at 9 o'clock that night, hysterical and demanding to talk to my wife. I had sent my wife to stay with her mother after her meeting with the pastor, so she wasn't there. The other man's wife ended up screaming at me on my front porch while my younger kids were inside watching a movie. She blamed my wife, said my wife had seduced her husband, that her husband was a good man who'd been led astray. I told her that it takes 2 people to have an affair and that her husband was just as responsible. She told me I was a fool if I took my wife back, that my wife was obviously the instigator since she was the one who'd confessed first. I tried to explain that her husband had lied initially and only admitted things when confronted with evidence, but she didn't want to hear it. It was an awful conversation that ended with her getting back in her car and speeding off. The following Monday, our pastor called a special meeting with the church elders to inform them of the situation. I wasn't part of that meeting, but I heard about it afterward from one of the elders who's been a friend of mine for years. The discussion was apparently heated, with some elders feeling this was a private matter between families and others believing the church had an obligation to address it directly. Ultimately, they decided that both my wife and the other man needed to step down from all leadership and volunteer positions immediately. They would not be allowed to attend the same services anymore. One would attend Sunday morning service and the other would attend Sunday evening service. They were both required to attend individual counseling and marriage counseling with Christian counselors approved by the church, and if they wanted to remain part of the congregation long term, they needed to demonstrate genuine repentance and commitment to healing. Of course, word spread through the church within days, despite everyone being asked to keep it confidential. Small churches are like small towns. Everybody knows everybody's business, whether they want to or not. Suddenly, I was getting phone calls and texts from people I'd known for over a decade, all wanting to know what happened. Some were offering genuine support, some wanted details under the guise of concern, and some had strong opinions about how I should handle things. A few people got angry at me for bringing it to the pastor instead of handling it privately. They said I caused unnecessary drama and division in the church by involving leadership. One woman from the women's Bible study told me that marriages go through rough patches and that I should have just forgiven my wife quietly instead of humiliating her publicly. I was stunned by that response and asked her if she would feel the same way if she discovered her husband was cheating. She told me that was different because her husband would never do that. And besides, airing dirty laundry in public never helped anyone. The other man's wife took a completely different approach to the situation than I did. She insisted on attending the Sunday morning service, which was the more crowded of the two. She made sure everyone knew exactly what had happened and who was at fault in her view. She played the victim perfectly, showing up to church in tears every week, accepting comfort and sympathy from anyone who would offer it. Within a month, she started a prayer group specifically for people dealing with betrayal and infidelity. It became this support group where she shared details about the affair that even I didn't know or want to know. She painted her husband as a weak man who'd been preyed upon by a temptress and painted my wife as someone who deliberately destroyed a happy family. It was uncomfortable and messy, but I understood that she was processing trauma in the only way she knew how. My wife, who moved back home after spending a week at her mother's house, started attending the evening service as required. The evening service was much smaller and quieter, which she said she preferred anyway. She lost weight, looked exhausted all the time, and was clearly struggling with depression and anxiety. Our kids knew something serious was wrong, but not the full details initially. I sat them down about a week after everything came out and explained that their mother and I were going through a very difficult time in our marriage. I didn't give them specifics, just said that trust had been broken and we were working on fixing it. Our oldest, who just left for college when all this went down, came home for a weekend in October, and I told him the truth. He stopped speaking to his mother after that and told me he was glad to be away at school. That hurt to hear, but I understood his need for distance. The younger three were confused and upset, but they were too young to fully grasp what was happening. They just knew that mom and dad were fighting, that mom was crying a lot, and that the family felt fractured. Our marriage counseling sessions were brutal. We started going twice a week in October, and every session felt like ripping open fresh wounds. My wife kept saying she was sorry, that she loved me, that she wanted to rebuild our family. But when pressed on why she did it, her answers kept changing. Sometimes it was because she felt neglected and taken for granted. Sometimes it was because she was afraid of getting older and wanted to feel desired again. Sometimes it was because the other man paid attention to her in ways I supposedly didn't anymore. The counselor pushed her to take real responsibility instead of making excuses or blaming our marriage for her choices. Those sessions usually ended with both of us emotionally drained and exhausted. I was grieving the loss of my marriage, even though we were still technically married and living under the same roof. I was angry, hurt, betrayed, and so tired I could barely function some days. I wanted to forgive her for the sake of our kids and our history together, but I also wanted to pack my bags and never look back, to start fresh somewhere far away from all of this. The counselor said those conflicting feelings were completely normal and that healing from infidelity takes years, not months. Here we are now in mid-December, about 2.5 months after everything came out, and the church has split into very distinct camps. There are people who support me and blame both my wife and the other man equally for their choices. There are people who support the other man's wife and blame my wife primarily, believing her narrative that she was the aggressor. There are people who thought the whole thing should have been handled privately and blame me for causing division by involving church leadership. And there are people who were so uncomfortable with the whole situation that they quietly started attending different churches. Our congregation has lost probably 20 to 25 families during these months. Some left because they were disgusted by what had happened. Some left because they were tired of the drama and gossip. Some left because they disagreed with how the elders had handled things. Sunday services feel hollow and tense now, like everyone's walking on eggshells. The other man and his wife filed for divorce in late October. From what I understand, it's been very contentious. She's pushing for full custody of their kids and trying to use the affair as evidence that he's an unfit father. He moved out of their house and into an apartment in another part of town back in November. By early December, he'd stopped attending our church. I heard he found a different congregation where nobody knew his history. His wife still attends our church every Sunday morning, and she's become quite close with some of the women who were previously my wife's friends. It's incredibly awkward when I see her, but we're polite to each other and keep our distance. I attend the Sunday morning service because that's where I've always gone and where most of my friends still are. It means I see his ex-wife every week, which is uncomfortable, but I refuse to be pushed into the evening service. My wife goes to the evening service and honestly seems to prefer it. She says it's less judgmental and people don't stare at her the way they do during morning service. My wife and I are still together, though I honestly don't know if our marriage will survive long term. We're still in counseling every week, and some days are better than others. She's trying hard to rebuild trust, being completely transparent with her phone and her schedule, going to individual therapy twice a week. She's working through whatever drove her to make those choices in the first place. But there's a part of me that died when I stood in that laundry room listening to her with him in our house. I don't know if I can ever look at her the same way or trust her the same way. The hardest part has been watching how it's affected our kids. Our oldest came home for Thanksgiving and barely spoke to his mother the entire time he was here. He's made it clear he plans to stay at school over winter break and get a job there instead of coming home for Christmas. That breaks my heart, but I understand why he wants distance from all this mess. Our second oldest, who's a junior in high school now, has become withdrawn and angry. She stopped going to church and refuses to participate in any family activities that include both parents. The two younger ones are handling it better, but they're also clearly confused about why everything changed so suddenly. They ask questions I don't know how to answer without either lying or giving them information they're too young to process. Some of the church members ask if I regret telling the pastor, if I think I should have handled it differently. And honestly, I go back and forth on that question almost every day. Part of me thinks maybe I should have just confronted her privately first, demanded she end it, and dealt with it quietly between us. Maybe our family would have been spared some of the public humiliation and judgment. Maybe our kids wouldn't be dealing with the fallout at school and in the youth group. But another part of me thinks that affairs that stay secret rarely just end cleanly on their own. They fester and continue and evolve and cause more and more damage over time. And there's something to be said for bringing darkness into light, even when it's painful and messy. The church community needed to know that two people they trusted to lead and teach and counsel were living double lives. The other man's wife absolutely deserved to know the truth about her marriage and who she was married to. My kids deserved to see that actions have consequences and that I wasn't going to just pretend everything was fine. They deserved to see that you don't have to accept betrayal just to keep the peace. So, most days, I stand by my decision to tell our pastor, even though it blew up everything, because the alternative was living a lie and letting two people continue to betray their families and their faith community without any accountability whatsoever. And I couldn't do that. I couldn't stand in my own laundry room, hide in my own house, listen to my wife betray me, and then just pretend it never happened. I couldn't sit in church next to her every Sunday, watch her volunteer and pray and present this perfect image, knowing it was all a lie. I couldn't look at his wife and his kids every week, knowing what I knew, and say nothing. So I made the choice to tell the truth, and I have to live with the consequences of that choice. But I hold my head up because I didn't do anything wrong here. I was faithful to my wife and my marriage for 18 years. I was honest about what I discovered, even when it would have been easier to stay silent. And when I found out about the betrayal, I brought it into the light instead of hiding it in darkness. Whether that makes me the asshole or not, I'll let you decide. TLDR, I discovered my wife was having an affair with a married man from our church, and after months of watching it unfold, I told our pastor everything, which caused the entire church to turn against both of them and their families, leading to multiple divorces, people leaving the congregation, and our community being split down the middle over whether I did the right thing.